Just before the 20th century kicked off, there was a man called Edward Thorndike who proposed the whole law of effect thing, which according to Wikipedia kicked off a psychological branch called operant conditioning. It was kind of putting a name to something that millions, if not billions of people had already known throughout history. Responses that produce a satisfying effect in a particular situation become more likely to occur again in that situation, and responses that produce a discomforting effect become less likely to occur again in that situation. In general, if a child gets burnt by putting his hand on a hot stove, they're less likely to do it again. I speak from painful experience on the matter, and if that stove were to provide him with a pancake every time the child reached up instead, well, there'd soon be a kitchen full of pancakes, because children have no impulse control. Simple, basic psychological stuff. It's easy for someone who grew up in an academic family in 2025 to poke fun at old theories and brand them as obvious. But even if it is, it needs to be spelled out and given a name, right? This led to operant conditioning. Spare the rod, spoil the child. The burned hand learns best. All those phrases amounted to the same thing. If you punish and reward a subject based on behaviour, the subject's behaviour will be modified over time. Life itself does a variation on this called cause and effect. Sort of. B.F. Skinner expanded on the initial theory of law of effect and built operant conditioning chambers to prove his own positive theories, testing it on mice and pigeons, because why not? This is quite similar to Pavlovian or classical conditioning, but has negative consequences rather than neutral ones, and requires agency rather than mere enforced association. Then the entertainment industry got a hold of it, and started putting operant conditioning in games of chance. Things like slot machines and other casino games embraced it. Brands and supermarkets and all those other wholesome things that give me money to pay the rent started adding a conditioning element to their layouts. Then it came to home systems. That arcadey one more go if you do this and a number goes up. If you do this, the colours change and there's a neat sound. If you do this, the positive feedback happens more. Games like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Centipede and Galaxian mastered the ability to provide reward for positive player actions, while punishing them for undesirable play. Please insert coin to continue. The difference between those games and the later titles is that you needed a certain level of skill to really last. And in order to gain that skill, you needed to invest a lot of coin in order to get lives or credits or whatever the game called it. It was a heady balance. Players were there at that later stage of the game, gracing the high score charts because they had the skill to do so, while those who weren't good enough paid a hefty price, in the literal sense. How do you improve upon perfection then? Why aren't we just playing Pac-Man and the like forever? Because modern game design broke the unspoken social contract that went with this shoehorning of psychology into gaming. They abused the player's brains by altering the reward. In order to play something like Galaga, the considerably harder sequel to Galaxian, for any length of time, you needed to get good, or start all over again. And unless the player has an infinite amount of money, they're not going to. But what if we were to port Galaga into home systems and bypass the monetary requirement? Delightfully devilish Namco, by switching from a pay-per-play model to a fixed one-time lump sum, players were given the opportunity to keep playing forever. This didn't ruin their brains because the skill ceiling was still present. But in Skinner's original experiment, Skinner, no great amount of skill was required. The subject just needed to make the right choice. So the gaming industry adopted that approach too, making games with a lower chance of failure, but the same dopamine high upon completion. Great, you've got your player pressing the big red button over and over and getting rewarded over and over, but eventually they get fatigued by this and stop. Why? This is known as the extinction. They're burnt out on the experience or satiated. The continuous praise for every action has overwhelmed them, or cheapened the game to the point that they've no interest in playing. So we start to adopt strategies from our good wholesome folks in the gambling industry instead. Rather than reward the player all the time, we reward them after a fixed number of actions, a form of delayed gratification that works very well. If you give everything away up front, then the player loses interest. But if you string them along with the promise of a good feeling at the end, they're engaged. A tactic also used by the pornography and prostitution industries. Some really upstanding industries above reproach thus far. I just need to include marketing, banking, big pharma, tobacco and alcohol into the mix somewhere and I've got the full set. Gotta catch 'em all. But back to the games companies. They took it further, and grinding became a thing. After a fixed amount of time, they'd get their reward. They just needed to keep racking those hours up. Except the player might get tired of waiting when they know what time they have left before the next reward. So we introduced deliberate obfuscation, so that their reward might hit in 6 hours or 60 hours, depending on their actions or the time that passes. The player no longer knows. They just have to keep playing, because these games can then monetize that behavior to keep the grind going so that the player pays up. It's no longer about player enjoyment. That's simply a means to the real end, getting more money out of it. It's not just arcade or gambling games that use this style though. Have a look at the financial model of Paradox. They give you the base game to give you a taste, then ask that you cough up for the DLC. Their grand strategy games are slow moving and the complete opposite of the frenetic arcade games I mentioned at the start of the video, but they're also Skinner boxes. The visual and sound design of modern games is intentionally providing you with near constant positive and negative feedback loops. And this kind of programming has been going on for a very long time. The way a player reacts to a bit of text is far different from how they react to a disapproving voice, and developers cottoned onto that in the 70s. This isn't some modern invention. Where previously the game had been to the point and informative, it was now capable of providing you with a negative audio cue to enforce better behavior. This kind of stuff's absolutely rife in modern games. From the equipping of items to the casting of spells to the taunts, every action is reinforced with a multimedia frenzy of colour and sound. And of course, your brain is responding to this. The victory and encounter and treasure themes from Might Magic 2 are seared into my brain forever. Because when I was a child, I'd come home from school and grind out a few levels. Because it afforded me a sense of escapism and control. And every time a chest dropped, there was intrigue over what was inside. And that was from a game that had CGA graphics and PC speaker. What do you think 4K and VR are doing to the young minds of today? Very little actually, because the brain-altering stuff is happening on their phones instead. This also ties in with a rapid decline in long-form entertainment. Books, cinemas, even regular television programs are all suffering and have to adapt their pacing and style to keep the audience from drifting off. Pay-to-win, easy grinding games with gambling elements all designed to alter your mind and have you parted from both your money and your previous stuffy old entertainment that required an attention span. Hooray! Gamification means that this strategy is now applied to everything else in life too, from dating to the workplace and everywhere in between. You're being psychologically manipulated by the law of effect and operant conditioning. And the cause and effect of this has my co-workers reaching for their phones and scrolling while in the middle of a conversation with me. No, it's not because I'm boring. Except it wasn't always like this. Not all games had a plethora of effects and sounds to reinforce player actions. Some of them were long-form experiences, where the payoff came at the end and you worked towards that goal, with harsh penalties should you fail. Most of these are considered clunky and boring and old and irritating by many gamers today. Speaking of old, in Might Magic 2 there's no save function. You have to go to an inn and rest to record your progress. This makes venturing in the wild a very dangerous affair indeed, because your party of heroes could get completely wiped out and all your progress lost in an instant. These days that mechanic is frowned upon as cheap and unfair by many, but there's a subsection of the gaming world that realizes just how important it was. If you make a game simple to play and remove any consequences of your actions, then what reason has the player to care? The answer is that you're being strung along by your rewards, so they don't care if there's little to no negative consequence, so long as those goodies keep coming. And should that ride come to an end, well, the player suffers literal grief at the departure of the title in question, and has to seek a different digital high in order to get over the end of their previous obsession, or you could say addiction. It falls on you to break the cycle, to defy the conditioning. You could go cold turkey, or you could taper off. The best way of doing the latter? Go and seek out the games that weren't just one big hit of dopamine, the ones that had consequences to your actions. the ones from the past that were long form in nature and required skill without bombarding you with flashing feedback. I'd continue this ramble a bit longer, but oh, I've got distracted by something over there. See ya.